Hey, what's up? Welcome to our series, The Supernatural Scripture, where we dig into the strange, the supernatural, and the most mysterious parts of the Bible. Buckle up, things are about to get seriously weird. From his baptism to the Transfiguration, and his bold declaration at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus made it clear that his mission went far beyond teaching and healing. His true purpose was to reclaim the nations and defeat the forces of evil that had held humanity in bondage. Today, we're diving into how every step of his journey was part of a strategic cosmic battle. The crucifixion wasn't merely an act of sacrifice, it was the ultimate move in this epic struggle. Jesus was now ready to fulfill his mission. At this point in his ministry, Jesus fully understood the plan. He was prepared to face it, not only because of what it would mean for humanity's salvation, but because it was the key to defeating the spiritual powers aligned against God. His journey to the cross was not an accident. It was a fulfillment of ancient prophecies that had hinted at his suffering and victory. We see one of these in one of David's Psalms in chapter 22, verses 12 through 15. Many bulls encompass me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me, like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. Earlier we talked about these bulls of Bashan and how they represent the demonic forces. In this prophecy, we can see the forces of darkness gathered around Jesus at his crucifixion, believing they were on the brink of victory, but they had underestimated God's plan. This moment of supposed defeat was actually the beginning of their end. Now let's dive into a topic that really doesn't get discussed much in the church today. We all know that Jesus was crucified and rose again on the third day, right? Well, have you ever asked yourself, where was Jesus' spirit during this time? To understand, we need to check out 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 20. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. There is a lot to unpack in this verse, so let's break it down. First, Peter says that Jesus was alive in spirit when his flesh was put to death. Jesus was human, so this isn't incredibly surprising. But Peter then says that Jesus' spirit went and made a proclamation to the spirits who were in prison about his victory. Now you might ask yourself, who are these imprisoned spirits that Peter is talking about in this passage? Well, he actually tells you right here. Peter calls out directly that the transgression happened in the days of Noah. And if you are a regular around here, then you likely know exactly who he is referring to. To understand, we need to look at Genesis 6, verses 1 and 2. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The transgression that Peter is referencing here is one that is referenced by many New Testament writers like Peter, Paul, John, and Jude. To better understand, let's check out 2 Peter 2 verses 4 and 5. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. Once again, we see Peter reference Noah, and I can assure you, it wasn't just his favorite Old Testament story. While not called out specifically in the Bible, many ancient Jewish texts covered this rebellion in detail. It wasn't just about Nephilim, although they were a large part of the story. These fallen angels corrupted humanity to the core. This is called out in Genesis in chapter 6, verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. What isn't explicitly mentioned in Genesis is that Yahweh imprisoned the spirits of these divine beings responsible for this corruption, holding them in chains of darkness until the final judgment. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, but what does any of this have to do with the death and resurrection of Jesus? I certainly hope so, because that's a great question. Jesus' victory over death, and in particular the reversal of the death curse, is blatantly obvious throughout the Gospels. But what often gets overlooked is that it's just one part of a much larger story that still continues to this day. Jesus was here to not only reverse the death curse, but he had his sights set on a much bigger plan. We talked earlier in this study about how Jesus was incredibly deliberate in everything he did on earth. We talked about how, on several occasions, he provoked the powers of darkness to conspire with humans in his death. From there, Jesus actually descended to the realm of the dead. Imagine the surprise, shock, and confusion in the spiritual realm when Jesus came walking in, proclaiming his victory over death. Knowing what we know about the conversations Jesus had on earth, I can only imagine the conversation that took place when Jesus made proclamation of his victory to these imprisoned spirits. While you may think this is the end of the story, it's actually not. This is why Jesus didn't ascend straight back to heaven. There was still some unfinished business on earth. We'll talk a lot about this later, but this sets the stage for the completion of this grand narrative. Everything Jesus did in his time on earth post-resurrection was deliberate too. Not only was he reversing curses, but fulfilling covenants. Yahweh promised Abraham that all nations would be blessed, and with Jesus' resurrection, we see the unfolding of that promise, wrapping up this epic narrative in a truly triumphant way. Thanks for stopping by today. Be sure to check out our next episode, and just remember to keep reading that Bible.